25 years ago, we published a paper saying that we'd seen a decrease in ozone above our Halley station. And at the time, we knew that possibly something was going on at some of the other Antarctic stations, but we couldn't get a global picture. And it really wasn't until NASA went back to the satellite data and found, yes, there's an ozone hole covering the entire continent, that the significance really struck home. We'd seen a massive change to our atmosphere in a very, very short space of time. I think that demonstrates just how fragile the atmosphere is, and that you've really got to thoroughly understand what you're doing when you put substances into the atmosphere. Another lesson that it gave us was the need for these continuous long-term monitoring measurements. With our data from Halley, we had continuous data going back to 1956. Other stations in Antarctica did have data, but at the time it was much more patchy. Since then they've gone back and reanalysed the data, and they too have continuous records. But ours was really the only one that ran throughout the entire period and was consistently reduced. And that allowed us to see that it was a very systematic change. It wasn't just a one-off event or 2 or 3 years. Every single year the ozone amounts were dropping. And having made that systematic breakthrough, then it was very quickly accepted by the vast majority of the world scientists. The situation today is quite different with climate change. There's a very vociferous lobby that denies that climate change is happening. Whereas with the ozone hole, there were alternative mechanisms proposed, but the basic observation wasn't contested in the slightest. Also, the fixing of the ozone hole, if you like, was relatively straightforward. The public pressure was there because a hole is a bad thing. Increased UV leads to skin cancer. That's a big public health issue. And the chemical manufacturers could provide substitutes relatively easy. So everything worked in favour of getting something done, and of course today all the world's governments have signed up to the Montreal Protocol. But climate change, it will take massive adjustments to lifestyles, particularly in the developed nations. The developing nations obviously have the right to seek better conditions for their population, and it should be equality across the globe. So we need to balance those desires out. There aren't any readily available substitutes for fossil fuels, so we have to learn to use less energy, and we can talk about, yes, the substitutes, but they can't fill the entire gap. And then we need the political will to actually do something. At the moment, my fear is that the public perception of climate change is that it's something actually quite nice. Greenhouse warming sounds very pleasant for many of the peoples that live in more northerly latitudes of Europe and America. And so why shouldn't we have climate change? It could be a good thing without realising that damage that climate change can cause through rising sea level and through heat waves, which, as we saw in Europe a few years ago, lead to a greatly increased death rate, particularly amongst the elderly population. So by making it clear to the public at large just what the dangers of climate change are, without being alarmist, but just saying this is the picture that is likely to happen. You choose what you want the politicians to do and tell them to do that. Then I think we can get international agreement. But at the moment, the picture is too confused, and I very much fear that it will take a major catastrophe before public opinion changes sufficiently that politicians will react to the situation.